let's do another video. Not much thought behind this when I started this video, but we'll give it a go, I guess. Yeah. Where should I start? It's as if I've dipped into some, not religious stuff, but some, I don't want to say spiritual either, because I think most of what I feel as sort of almost new age spirituality that is, quite common in both the States and here in Sweden. I find it somewhat off-putting, I think the word is. It feels not, I'm sure it feels genuine from their perspective, but I don't perceive it as being genuine for some reason. But anyway, and perhaps one reason for that is that I think that there is something to traditions and so forth. So all these new things are in some sense ignorant of what they don't, or what has stand the test of time in some sense, even though it should challenge. So, but it's messy because religions have, of course, cost a lot of trouble, but also perhaps being necessary for the morals in societies and so forth. So it's really hard to distinguish good and bad and so forth. And it's even harder for me to. It's as if I haven't. It's hard for me to. I want to be transparent, but some of these issues are so both sensitive and so far from thought out for myself that I just attempting to addressing them becomes very open to interpretation, and also people may put me in a category that I don't want to be in on any side or on any spectrum, really. So I don't know, but anyway, but I think I've talked a bit about this earlier, that I'm not an atheist, and I'm not necessarily agnostic, depending on how you define it. My definition of what I am, which is similar to agnosticism, but it is that I don't know. It's perhaps possible to know. Other people may perhaps know, and I may perhaps know sometime, but for now I don't know. What I do sense is that, and then relating to the question, if that is the answer, if I get a question, do I believe in God or not? And for me, it is, I usually, if I have to choose yes or no, I usually tilt toward yes, because but the reason that I'm doing that is because, and I want to be clear here, that most people, why they disagree about what God is because they don't have the same definition of what God is. And when they do think that they have, they usually, I mean, in some sense, a common reason, let's say, but it goes quite deep, that if you have a certain conception of what God is, you tilt toward conclusion about what you think about it. So it's heavily implicated, and usually those who do think in God usually have some religious affiliation that is perhaps can be influenced by bias, of course, but also there comes so much along with it when you defend a religious position connected with traditions lots of things that are hard to melt for someone who's trying to be as scientific and not have any connection to it. So it becomes really hard to discuss what God is really, and if there's nothing to talk about at all. But my conception of it, and this is the key thing here, that when I say it or God, the problem with those who have a very skeptical view of that is that they impose that frame that they already have on God when they're trying to interpret what I'm saying or anyone is saying, which is natural. That's what we always do. But perhaps it is fair to say, it's better for me to say that I believe in a mystery. And for me, that mystery is the same thing as people has labeled as God. So I believe in some mystery. There are mysteries in this world. That's the right way to put my belief. I believe in mysteries. I've actually never formulated it in that clear before, but that's why I believe. I believe in mysteries that may perhaps be solved or explored and adventured into in some sense. But and I think most atheists would agree with me, although perhaps they would say, well, nothing is a mystery when you've discovered it. And yeah, that might be true, but it's still mysteries to us still. What like physics, and there are a lot of things that are unsolved, that if they don't like to view it as mysteries and just unsolved problems, then, well, that's, for me, that's a driving force to view it as mysteries. If you just see it as problems, then at least you acknowledge that you're not omnipotent, and you actually, there are things that you don't know, and the reverence in some sense for that, to explore that, is, I think no scientist would claim that that's wrong, to explore that. That's what science does. And so that quest for knowledge or insight and understanding, that really is at the bottom of what I have quite, perhaps some would see quite unjustified, called what I think is God. And they would say, well, that's not the same thing as God. Well, and then that's the question, what is? In some sense, that is actually what people label as God. What they don't know. Perhaps they say it's impossible to get to know God. Some religious people, but they would still say that revelations is good, or that coming closer to God is something that's really good, and coming closer to the, what's the word, all knowledgeable? No, it's omnipotent, perhaps, but they will never get there, of course. But they think that it is, well, I'm limited in my knowledge here, but being closer to it, you can be more far from it or closer to God, the truth. Then, if that's the relationship to what is that thing, and so then the atheist could say, well, do I believe in an omnipotent God? And then my answer would be perhaps that I don't know, and that's part of the mystery, which is, but they would still say that I'm not, that's not God. Well, I would then say that, well, that's my perception of what God is, and the word is if you don't think it's God, then perhaps, well, in some sense, I was almost argue that they view perhaps Christians and views or Muslims as so narrowly framing of life that is not fair to them to describe to, that they think, because I do think that that is what they think about when it's God. They think about, and to say that it's different things is for me not really fair, because you're addressing the most complicated mystery in the universe, basically. Why is there anything except nothing, instead of nothing? If you then claim that another conception of that mystery is a different thing, not God, well, then you're quite ignorant in some sense, because of course it's the same thing, but I would argue that your contempt of the old idea of God, or what you perceive as the old idea, the atheists perceive as the old idea of God, with such contempt that they don't want to call that mystery God still. And since God is, I don't know if it's fair to say that it is our label on this, or if it's an intrinsic, I mean in the religious context, I don't know if it's fair to say that it's our word for it, or if it's intrinsically a word connected to the substance of God. I don't know what they think, but in just probably atheist reasoning, one could say that it's, even though they wouldn't agree with it, but that if you pluck away the word God, you would still, it's really about what you define as God. Well, if I say that I believe in that mystery in some sense, I think that's God, then they would say, well, I don't think that you believe in God, you just believe in a mystery. But yeah, it's back and forth. But at the same, I just want to be clear. I don't know how to relate to this question. If I believe in God still, I don't just spoke it out, but it's in some sense it feels obvious that I believe in something. And if that would not be God, then what would it really be? I mean, it's, in some sense, God is quite a good word for it, because it kicks in some reverence, I think. Or I don't know if that's the right word, with some. But I guess it depends on how positive your emotional reactions are to the word of God, and the traditions that is associated with it. And so yeah, and but that's a deep topic. I don't know really how to proceed right now, but I think that it is a not fully related topic, but still somewhat related. I think that there is very, very much to get from I think we are influenced immensely by social things and attitudes and conceptions. It's still, at the same time, we're also very influenced from chemicals and substances, and what we eat, drink, and so that's for sure, and just lots of things. But since I've found that ideas and attitudes and people they have influenced me immensely many times. That's why I still think that attitude and attitude and what you choose to believe or not believe, but the story you tell yourself about yours, where you are and where you're going, and that story is something that I can work tremendously on. I still think I can do a lot there, because I have since I've had some what's the word, challenges, or some things that I've perceived to make some things that have made some things harder for me recently. It's easy to, especially when you're sick, kind of, and you don't want to push yourself, you don't want to, a natural thing for me when I'm happy and just want to do things, then I just go for a run, or I feel great about getting up early, but exactly these type of things are things that are not perfectly, and I become overly concerned of not abusing my body in ways that would hinder me to get healthy again and free from the sickness. So some things hinders me, but some of them shouldn't. Just have a passion and doing things. I still think that as long as you're doing it in moderation and are not stressing like heavily, I think it's very good to do, even if you're sick, I guess. So I don't want to give myself an excuse for not trying to deal with my psyche, and I also think that I shouldn't, even viewing it as an excuse is absurd, because I want to be happy, right? I want to be but I think that where were I? Where were I? Just taking charge of my attitude is extremely important. So I'm trying to do that now, not getting too sort of down, too much depressed and so forth. But it was I totally lost my train of thought. But so sorry that I lost my train of thought. Where were I? It was an interesting thing. It was a really interesting thing. That attitude is important. Where were I? Attitude is very important, and that I found reason to. I can still work much more on my attitude, so that I don't fall into the trap of being sort of just doing mundane things with a slow pace and not a positive attitude and so forth. I think it's really, really important. So, and that was my main thing, that social interactions and stuff like that really does a lot for you. People you listen to on the internet, or people you meet. Unfortunately, due to COVID, there are some limitations, but I could do better even there, perhaps. At least when I'm healthy again. But perhaps there are more webinars or something like that I could go to, but yeah, well, that's the thing I could do. So I will. And yeah, and I also could just, but just starting on that bit, sort of appreciating the moment and trying to actually take charge of your attitude at the moment. I also think that I'm in some sense are not really good at doing that right now, so I should be even better at it. So, and I think I could be really good at it. And saying that in itself is a way for me to actually practicing it. I mean, if I don't think that I can be good at something, then what's the point? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you don't believe in yourself in some way. So I want to build up confidence, even though I have a weird kind of confidence already. But yeah, and but it's also relating to, because you want to achieve something, you want to be proud of what you did that day, and that, because that's the key to feeling any type of confidence. And it's really what Charlie Munger talks about. Like some people want to say to be proud is not good. He don't think that's a good idea, because you should be proud of what you're doing good, but you should also be terrified of what you're doing bad. So when you're doing something good, you should be proud about it. Like, for example, I'm proud that I'm doing this video because it's good, extremely good for social. I feel better, always feel better later on during the day, or that's the trend at least. I felt that I've much better later on if I have done these videos, because I get to express myself and my deeper thoughts and so forth in live, sort of live. Because yeah, and I'm also proud of this because I know that it's good practice to express your deeper thoughts. It connects you to what you really want to do. I think it's necessary for growth, and I'm also aware of the attitude that I'm having when I'm doing it is even better. And it's also good for, this was something more, for overall training and expressing myself. It's just a very good thing to do, to learn, to express yourself in English, although I'm not very focused on the rhetorics, as you obviously see, but it's still training. It's still good to train yourself to record yourself if you want to be in this digital era where YouTube is huge and you want to influence people there perhaps. And yeah, it's really good training to be on video. I think it's really, really, really important. So that's something I'm really. Then there are other things today that I feel like, was it necessary? Did I do you stop on a P when you say postpone? Postpone? It's not ridiculous, but I think you say the P, postpone. Or do you say postpone? No, you don't. Sorry. It just feels weird. But where I sorry. It's as if my mind is not entirely with me today. It's sad, but I think there are lots of things just popping back up in my mind right now. Is that I should probably write a speech, I think. I remember that I've read some of the things that I've written earlier when I tried to publish on Medium. Never became anything of that. Maybe I should go back to it. But then I read something and I tried to sort of speak good and having sort of like a speech, and I always got very good feedback on speeches in school, so I think it's something that I should practice on, because it will also help me express myself more intriguing in English and in Swedish, probably. Just the practice of speaking is, when you practice Swedish, of course you're practicing your general speaking abilities, and when you're practicing English you train your general speaking abilities, and so you obviously also get good on both language, but practicing in the same tongue is of course, or in the same language is of course important when you want to express yourself in it. And I want to get good at both, so I have to do both, of course. For example, I consider to do this video in Swedish because it was so long time ago I recorded that, but I feel I'm quite fluent in English now, so yeah. I was thinking about what I've done during the day that I thought that it could have been quicker on or have done better, and they just in some sense got wasted, it felt as if, but I'm still not sure if that's the case. It's really hard for me to discern my activities. But I know that I have done one thing that I think that I'm overly concerned about is that I tend to get into details quite fast and overanalyze some things. And this is the key that I'm aware of this to some extent. I know the opportunity cost, but since like for example, I want things to be so good that I sacrifice brain power to optimizing things that are not really that important. But that is not to say that all the discussions, perhaps some of them of course, it's hard to discern which exactly, but there's really some things that are unnecessary and some things that are necessary. Like for example, thinking about what you're doing during your day is something that I think is that I've been harping on, and for some people perhaps perceived as overanalyzing. And it's definitely true that you could have a more strategic way of tackling the problem, but that does not make the analyzing in itself bad or worthless. Could always argue what if you're just jumping to the activity, then you're probably done quite soon, and that's true. Although if you jump into the wrong activity, yeah, and so you go back and forth, and it might lead to paralysis in some cases, and so it's really hard to know when it's fruitful to analyze a thing and when it's not. But for one thing, for example, it's a really small toilet in my new apartment, and the shower is almost right. It's like in the middle of. It's not on. It's a small toilet, and they have a shower in it, so it's hard to not make everything wet when you take a shower. And I don't have the perfect sort of, what's it called, the thing you have so that you don't squash everything with water everywhere. That's not perfectly. Basically, one needs two. One to protect the door that you get in from, and one to protect the toilet and the rest of the bathroom, so not everything is wet. And I just have one, but it's larger, so I can sort of But anyway, my point here is that when I tried to be so focused on making everything right so that I could take my shower without making everything wet and so forth, I realized I spent more time on that than I would have been to just take a fast shower and clean everything up afterwards. Just if I had to, if I had, and that's the virtue of which makes capitalism to some extent quite good, because you just get forced to do something, and to have a job, you force yourself to just be there 8 o'clock in the morning. And here, like for example, I could, since I thought that, well, I should not rush to, it's better to take rational decisions. How do I take rational decisions so that I can take my shower faster? And then I started to analyze, well, this is the important thing, and so on and so forth. But then I realized if I had just knew that I have to be, in 7 minutes I have to be out of this, or even 5 minutes I have to be out of this shower and really on my way, then I would have just acted completely different. Of course I would have been somewhat more stressed, and you could argue it's good to stress and this might sound as overanalyzing, but I think it's important for me to understand that I am, in some sense, actually overanalyzing things, and that is in itself an analysis that is not an overanalyzing stuff, I think. But I get somewhat discouraged when I say these type of things, but I actually think that's true, and until I'm proven otherwise by myself or someone else, that's what I believe. So analyzing stuff is good. Most people associate overanalysis with they think it's overanalyzing, but sometimes it's actually fruitful and good analysis, even though I'm aware of that there are lots of times when I do overanalyze. Like for example, how you optimize your shower so that you don't make everything wet. Just take the damn shower and just clean it up. Pretend you only have 5 minutes or something. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things that I'm trying to optimize that are not worth optimizing in some sense. And yeah, and it's also the thing that I think there are some switches in the mind that has to be turned off and turned on. And since the analytical part of the brain is quite not very creative, let's say, I think that, for example, I do think that I can come up with quite good ideas for analyzing and some sort of zest of knowledge and understanding, but that zest is often limited in power and emotion, because I'm so often doing the thing of analysis and rationality. And I think that's why, for example, Peter Thiel says that even though he's very, very, very much pro-reason, and he thinks that there is a lack of it in the world, and that's where we should focus, and where we should actually be more in the intellect instead of the will and so forth, or using the Thomistic categories that I actually read about today. So that's another good thing I did. I read about, because I read Einstein biography, and he claimed to be the first person to have this is a sidetrack, I know, but the first person to have a conception of God that did not sort of made a distinction between the soul and the body and said it was the same thing. Spinoza, that's a Jewish philosopher from, I think, 18th century, perhaps 17th. And I thought, well, when I read Thomas Aquinas, early, I think it's 1200s, 1100s. I thought that which actually was he said, and I reread it, and then was when I stumbled upon, which first of the things was that, and that going back to spirituality, why I started to talk about spirituality, really, even though I never came to that, it was that I had read that, and he said, basically, it was similar to what I remember, that the body and the soul is not as the usual from Augustine's and many other theologians. The early Christianity said that the soul is sort of captured in the body, but Thomas Aquinas more sort of said that it was it was not exactly the same, but the soul was in every part of the body, and it was intrinsically, in some sense, I don't know how he put it, but in that sense. I'm not even sure what Spinoza and what I read in the Einstein book, but there it was, I think it was the soul that was exactly equal to the body. And okay, we can discuss what is the soul. Is soul really a thing? And I've actually not thought about much about soul, but it intrigues me to think about that the world is such that I have a soul in some sense. But it also, I think, is the right thing to think about it, that it is sort of connected to, it is not separate from the body in some sense. So then it comes to, does the soul survive? And I actually, he talked about so for example, he said that the soul would be very marginalized without the body. It wouldn't really be much at all, even though it would exist, and it intrinsically would exist, but without so we thought that it was dependent upon sort of the mechanistic workings of the body, but that the soul is still something else, but that is, and the main things about that is that it have ability to, 1, grow, 2, have sensations, and 3, to reason. And the last thing is the most important. The first one, grow on the plants on us, and second one, to feel, and to intuition or sensation is animals and humans or man, as I said, and the last one, to reason, is only man. So that's the most important sort of. I think that's quite. I like it when I read it. It doesn't mean I necessarily think about it, but it just feels right, and that's something that is true religion. It feels right sometimes, but on rational basis, people can really question it, and that's it. It becomes hard to, yeah. But where were I when I ended up in this digression? I was talking about Einstein. What did I be? No, it was the ending part on that, because in the ending part in the, when I continued, I read the whole, because this was just on this sub thing on psychology, which the author Durant that I read from the history books, that's where I had read it, and I reread it. I read the whole, just two pages, but in the end he talked about the will and the reason. Will and reason, and will is sort of, that's not really where free will is. So he talks about so his argument for free will is not that, because the will is prey or is just consequence of the desires and the sensation originally that Locke and Kant, was it now Locke perhaps, and someone else and talked about, but the ability to discernment and judgment, that is the free will. And yeah, you can have some Harris argument which is opposed to that. You don't choose your thoughts, it's just something that arrives. Even the skepticism of that utterances in some minds isn't something that appears in the mind. It's very close to infinite discussion from an historical perspective, but anyway, and philosophically, a historical question. But so why? Because that was digressed me when I talked about the free will or discernment. I think will and rationality. I've talked about reason and analysis. And how that's important and good. I don't know exactly how I came here, but anyway, what I was talking about was overanalyzing stuff, and I do think that I overanalyze some small things, and I just think that it's that I can become a lot better on that, but there are still lots of things that I'm doing really good. Like, for example, reading about these things and letting myself expose myself to new ideas and going in depth on lots of ideas and trying to figure out what I actually think about the world and where we live and all that. But sometimes it feels as if I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just walking back and forth in my apartment talking to a piece of metal and glass and things and some batteries and and that's the attitude. And of course you have to have an objective view of the world, but as long as you have your mind with you and you train your mind to think rationally, then there's really nothing can stop you in the long run, I think. So the question here becomes, I guess, because it goes back to being proud of what you do. I do want to know what I'm doing wrong, what I could be better at. And I do also think, even though I think I should think about that more often, but I do think that I'm doing things right, or that I'm doing a lot of things right, but it could be even better. But that's the thing, you always, at least for me, become sort of unsecure that you're not doing things right, or that something could be much better. But that's sort of part of it. It should be like that in some sense. You should question that you're not doing things good enough, but you should do that along with knowing that you're doing so much good compared to many people, and compared to where you have been on large measure. And even that last statement is harder for me to know for sure, but the virtue of me is bringing up that thought. Well, do I actually know that for sure? Because in the long run, the person who makes sure that the things that he believes in is actually very true is the one who wins. Because if you don't get to certainties in your beliefs and base there's room for faith and in the sense of doing things that you don't have absolute certainty in. That was another thing that I was going into do things that is more creative, that is not only overanalyzing stuff. But so that was the thing. I want to get back to that because that's really important. But so yeah, but if you don't get the foundations right, your beliefs of what is good practice, what is good to do during the day, and so on and so forth, then you're completely lost, because you will base your view on the reality on false assumptions and sort of axioms, or so. And if you do that, you will you will have a worldview and you will have some understanding, but getting the fundamentals right, I think it's so damn important. So being critical of your own thought and activities in order to improve them even more, I think that's so extremely important that it's so yeah. But it's just one last, before going into creativity and so forth, I will tackle this one thing again about hesitation and doubt in relation to improvement, because it is really fucking tricky to know how to relate to the art of improvement along doubt, because doubt is it is really especially if you want to do something great and different, as Eric Weinstein talks about, there's a valley really going from where you were. When you take your own path and do something different, you will sort of it's which I'm arguably am in. I'm in right now. It's very easy to associate the conventional success or the conventional career as something good, and when you haven't found the other thing yet, then that's a period of quite extreme source of doubt, because you start to doubt yourself and what you're doing, and so you become even more and it is good to doubt it, because some things you need other people, you need other institutions, and you need, like, for example, if something you're going to learn this thing, you force yourself to do it because you have a grade, it's in some sense easier. But that was also the thing that I turned against, and which is in line with Einstein when he said that accumulation of material should not stifle the student's freedom and independence and intellectual pursuits. So that's my phrasing of it, but so I'm paraphrasing it. But that's really the thing. But it is harder in some sense if you're not because that's one thing. It's hard to come by people who are really thoughtful thinkers, who are worth having exchange with. But I'm also perhaps somewhat too arrogant when I'm not thinking about it's easy to think that too much about too many people, but a large measure I think that's true, that they are few and they're hard to come by, and some of them are in the institutions and the universities for sure, but it also feels as if that is the place where they are indoctrinated in some mundane thinking that is not really outside the box, and it's not passionate and visionary and so forth, and that goes back to the general era of our time, I think, and it's somewhat political discussion, but it's really a discussion of culture and where we're at and what people are doing and attitudes, and it's a broader conversation, but I think that is that's the reason where I am in some sense, and so I have to understand what I'm up against or something. Not, I don't seeing as necessarily antagonistic, but what problem I'm up against, perhaps you could say. Not as people, but as how the state of the world. And so that is that's quite a long thread of thought, but I related, what did I actually do there? I related my willingness to do something different to the state of the world, because I think there's something lacking. And yeah, and I could be wrong in that for sure, but there seems to be a lot of people who are in line with me here, and I hope it's not a bias. It's because it felt easier to let go of the old, but so yeah. And perhaps that connects to creativity, I don't know, but the general thing I wanted to address here was doubt, and it's quite natural to feel that if you want to find your own thing, and the sort of your other pursuits, and when you have not sort of settled into something that is that's already there, but so optimizing your day and knowing what to do during the day, it's hard because it's not obvious. This is what you're going to learn and this is what you're going to do, so it becomes a challenge. But I think it's really important to continue evaluating that, and like, for example, what I've been doing today, what have I been doing that have been constructive and useful? I think there are all lots of things that I have, but it feels as if my day is just running away. There are some things that I felt was, in some sense, a waste of time. What I did was I looked at some old photos. I wanted to see what had really changed, and during these years I just looked old photos of my dog and me, and I also find some videos that I'm playing the guitar, and I watched those, and that took some time for sure. So I was probably sat for 40 minutes to an hour doing that, and there was something I did earlier, and I thought that, yeah, so how much have I actually been reading is something that I question myself with, and for example, because that's one of the most important things you can do, really, and I challenge myself to say that, well, I perhaps have not been doing that much of it. I do think that I've done minimum, let's say, I've probably been reading for and together I don't think it's more than 1 hour and 20 minutes compared to perhaps I could have done 8 hours. No, I couldn't, but because I did this video, and but otherwise, where the heck did I ever all the time went? I woke up at 7 7:40, something like that. And I did meditation for an hour. I did some sort of repetition of old things that I thought was important to do, which probably together took. It shouldn't have taken more than 8. Let's say 8. What's the time then? 8. Maximum 9 o'clock for doing all that, and that's quite a long time, perhaps. I don't know, but and then studying for 40 minutes, and then which was actual reading. Then it's 9. Then it was a long shower, which the shower in itself was not long preparing for it, and just not. There's so confused. There's so many things that just take my way from me, take my day from me, and then I went for a walk, which feels reasonable to do. I think I always need to walk every day, so that felt reasonable to do, and I did that. And when I'd done that, I came back and I took a glass of water and did something that I've forgotten what it was, but I think I read in the Einstein book, but I'm not sure. And that feels weird too. Where the heck did all the time went? I really don't know. So I think I will rest of for the next day. I will be even more prudent about where the heck do the time go. But at the same time, it becomes more hectic, and I've had not a sound relationship to stress for many years, so I don't want to trigger that. But I still don't want just have my whole day. So being even more aware of where the time goes. Perhaps ask myself every hour, where did this hour went, so I know it. That's probably a good thing to do, I think. Just telling myself, okay, this hour went for this hour went for that, and so on and so forth. Then I probably get aware more of where my time went. But I just said perhaps it's more than 1 hour and 20 minutes that I have read, but I don't think it's definitely not more than 2 hours. I don't think that. But. I also actually did some Tinder, but that was not for that long. But I did some, because I thought that, well, women makes you motivated. So I thought that, well, perhaps Tinder is not that bad, and a couple of minutes is that bad, but it's, as we say in Swedish, många bäckar små, which basically is many. What's it called? Many. Rivers small, and it is in that order, and actually sounds as weird in Swedish too if you said it's in that order, but many rivers small, which means that, yeah, there are many. If you have many rivers, it actually becomes something quite great and important. So if you some minutes to Tinder, some minutes to take a shower, some minutes to take a walk, some minutes to meditate, some minutes to eating breakfast. Of course, some things you have to do, but be more crucial and just sort of time block, I guess, would be a sound thing to do, which I've been thinking about many times. And it's turned out to be quite a long video, but I think it really feels great to do. So the thing here is that I think that just never thought I would talk for this long, but I did. I'm somewhat warm, so I have to take something off. Yeah, so yeah, I thought about where the day was going and try to relate that to being proud of what you do, know what you think is a good things to do. I also realize when I'm doing this, I'm quite, and this is the thing that I think is quite much room for improvement, and that I have sort of inherited or got from my parents. I'm not very strategic in my analysis. I bring up a lot of connections, but it's not very, okay, now I'm going to address this issue. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, what's my conclusion? Okay, next thing. That's not my approach. I'm like, okay, that's, but I'm not sure. Okay, perhaps that inclination. I'm doing that, which is fair and okay, I think. Sometimes, I don't know if it's always. Sometimes when you address an issue, you want to be very clear and precise in what you're thinking about, and you want to make sure that you get something out of it. And I think that there's a formula that Tai Lopez talked about that was called KSE, Knowledge, Strategy, Execution. And he said most people skip the S. They don't do the strategy. They go directly from knowledge to execution without doing a strategy. And in some sense, that's what I guess that I need, because it gets you to think more long term or frame it more in a sort of, in a with a better overview over the days. So we also, and I mean days, not the day, because in the long term, or after some days, you perhaps forgot about that idea and you just let your day fall through and so forth. So more, making a plan, not because I know I will always lose my ideas, and that's probably the key thing, that when you've thought about something, you lose your ideas and you don't follow through, or you, there are so many things that, for example, when I train myself here to thinking a certain way and come up with solutions, the next day they're gone if I don't make sure to not necessarily only execute, but also strategy and so forth. It's easy to lose your thoughts and not implement, even though you should have strategy. Strategy is in a way to make sure that you actually execute in the long term, because that's the thing, I guess. And it's also a way for you to make sure that it's not only knowledge and it stays there, because you may not even execute because you forget about it and so forth. So a strategy for me here is probably to rehearse the conclusions from this video, and the conclusion I could summarize in here, I guess. Conclusion is that, or the conclusions are that, sorry that I never went into creativity and so forth, but perhaps I may put an end note on that now, that I just think that you should limit this analyzing part of you that I have, and everyone else of us have. Sometimes it's good to not let that be sort of always present. Some things just need, but it's hard to know how you do that without reasoning. Reasoning is the, but yeah, that's hard to know actually. I actually forgot what I've been thinking about that, because that's really interesting. How do you doing what feels right and doing just things because it's motivating. Let's say if I feel to look it up, it just being very, very focused on your attitude when you're doing it, so you actually get forward in some sense. You just bang up a strategy and not just too hesitant in every aspect, and keeping the go while you're doing it, so you don't get stuck in a melancholic attitude towards your strategy. You actually believe in the strategy and you push through and you revise it afterward. Perhaps you keep your analytic, but you're still sort of pushing in a way that corresponds with a good constructive attitude. That is not only it's really like I think you get my point. So it's really about attitude again. Getting back to this, attitude and creativity is probably related in some way, and perhaps it's not even necessarily have to be against rationality and discernment and analyzing. But that's the thing, analyzing can be destructive in a sense if it's not accompanied with attitude, the right attitude. So I think that's the main thing. That's sort of my summarization of and incorporation of also the creativity part there. But yeah, I talked about Einstein and so and stuff, and also religious things, but or spiritual things, and I still think that if you can incorporate it in sort of reverence or if you feel like you have having a soul, if that's empowering for you. Like for example, I think it might be for me. I never really thought about much about the concept of a soul. It's more easy for me to the same reaction that some atheists have to the word God. It's I have a little more similar view. I like that view when I hear the word soul, because soul for me suddenly becomes more of something supernatural, or like angels, or even though I don't say that, I say they don't exist, because again, I don't want to be arrogant and ignorant in that sense. I know that there are things that are hard to know for sure, but when it comes to the soul, I still there. I think that if it makes me productive, if I imagine myself having a soul, maybe that's a good thing, and I can be aware of that's the thing I'm just playing on my mind. Along with knowing that there is a possibility that there is something that exists, that is a soul. But again, what the definition, what do you label it? But since the consciousness is still such of a mystery, it's not, you can just say soul, and it's a part of the game that you don't know what it means, and that's the beauty of it, perhaps. I really liked how I put that. I'm so fucking good. I'm kidding. But so yes, the soul, I think that's a good thing to incorporate in life to some extent. I'm very newbie on this subject, but it feels right. And so yeah, that feels right, and God, perhaps that can motivate people or make them more passionate about things. And so if that's something you implement in your pursuits, it goes along with attitude, in my view. I don't know how to explain why, but it comes naturally. In a sense, it just feels more motivating life to think that this there's something that exists that is God or the soul. So that's a way to knyta ihop säcken. That's what we say in Swedish, another Swedish expression. I don't think you say that in English. It means to what's the word? To when you have a rope that you take around something and you make a knob, what's a knob, or you entangle the rope in itself, so that there's a thing there. so a word for that, to the bag, that's the expression. To I don't know what the word is for doing that thing you do with the rope, but you know what I mean, to the bag, so that it's closed. So that's an expression too. That's what I just did. I the bag for this discussion because I summarized it in a beautiful way that I thought was very beautiful, because I incorporated the soul, I incorporated the God, I incorporated how that relates to pursuing what is hard to know, or how to know what is right, although I'm not sure if I did that, but I at least related it to creativity and doing stuff, but like develop some agency in doing stuff with an attitude and creativity even, and not too much melancholy in the analyzing stuff. And also the strategy part, I don't know if that's related, but it goes along with attitude, so it doesn't become something melancholic that's just going on in the mind that is not related to planning and execution. Perhaps that's the virtue of business and capital, that you're forced to relate to reality now, because if you're not, you remain in the head. So you make a plan for tomorrow, perhaps. Make a plan and you make a strategy and so on and so forth. So that's probably the main thing. So yeah, I don't think it's not a coincidence that I listened to the person responsible for the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand is this philosopher, you perhaps heard, which is not controversial, but not some people strongly disagree, and some people really reverence her, I think, and I think I'm much more to the latter part, even though I'm very newbie. I don't know that much about her philosophy. But there are some things that resonate with me there. And he was quite, even though I'm not confident to trust all his reasoning, and there's something there that makes me hesitant to accept everything he says. Oftentimes it's just an estimation of a person, and usually I was hesitant to place him along with the other 99% of the population that I found somewhat not critical into thought enough, but perhaps he is, but at least there was something in his attitude that made me, which I'm actually acting out right now, the positive aspect of me that I've tried to show for the last 5 minutes, that is somewhat more, which is the gist of what I thought that all this concept that I brought up would emanate, or the result of that, all that came together in that attitude, if that makes sense. I think that's really what there's something there. So, and that's why, it's not a coincidence that I was listening to him, I think. And I think it was really, good, something good there. So I'm really faced with a decision here to stop this video or not. And this is trouble, this is a challenge. Okay, I'm quite troubled, I'm open about it, I'm quite troubled about the fact that I don't know if I should end this video or not, because I feel it's a good practice and I feel good about doing it, I really do. I feel quite good now, and I think that's because I've been talking for a long time and putting all these ideas together and being aware of how I'm thinking. And I also think that perhaps this is the end note of this, that I oftentimes found that when I'm talking about things for a long time, I feel good, and it's usually when I'm walking, not only walking here, it's also when I'm walking on long walks, especially if it's up to an hour or so, then my mind starts to go, and I start to think a lot more. And it's usually positive thought, or not positive, but positive associations. I feel good when I'm doing it, and that's perhaps related to taking a walk. Just that's you usually feel good when you do that. It's like with other exercise. But it's interesting that it happens when I'm doing these long videos. It's something that I'm not sure, but I think it's related to that. That's why but also that I started to think about my attitude and so forth. But yeah, this was the point I wanted to make, which is perhaps the final thing here. That one shortcoming of writing, because I talked about long sessions last time, or the time before that's necessary for getting depth into what you're doing and memory and so forth. But it's also true that yes, writing is really good in some virtue, with some virtues, but there's some things, like for example, I see myself as I did the DNA test, which basically made me average on everything except one. There are 5 personal traits that in the big 5 that they measured, and I get average in most of them. And the exception was, one of the exceptions at least, was that I don't remember the other one, but one was extroversion, introversion, and I see myself as a very introverted person, but I have some characteristics that are perhaps associated with extroversion, but generally I am very introverted. At least that's what I thought, and that was when I met one person, for example, Ty Lopez. He said that I was hyper introvert, or that was his question of, well, at least he said, and you're hyper introvert in some sort, and so and perhaps Swedes are more of that. So that's where was sort of a cultural what's his English word, cultural clash. But anyway, my point here, on the test I get extroversion, genes for extroversion, even though this personality thing, I don't know how much they have a confidence score from 1 to 5, how much this correlates with personality, or how much they correlate with lactose intolerance, for example, and all that's the confidence score is quite high. If I'm not remember incorrectly, but in this thing I think it's much more uncertain, but it's still interesting that the genes that they've found that correlates to introversion and extroversion, for me it's the one with extroversion, and that's interesting. And I think there's some truth to that, because I have been very good at speeches, and there I have some human elements that I think people appreciate. I'm a people person in some sense, even though I'm very, very not introverted, but very interested in ideas, and are usually very quiet. And but I also was a very good actor when I was sort of between 8 and 10 years old. I was really active in those. When you had plays at school, I was best, really, people thought, or sort of, that I really thought that I was doing a great job as an actor, and it was before in teenage period and all that. So I have that sort of thing, and so that's why I think writing is perhaps not always best for me, because it's not as much related to social interaction as doing a video is. So I think that's actually very important and good for me. And I don't know how much the walking made me do it, or how much the video and the talking made me do it, and just the influence I had yesterday from a sort of influencing person. That is, but I think this was a very good practice anyway. And I think I'll end on that note. Again, it was the thing here. What do I? Sorry, I've always become blank longer than I thought. But I was thinking about that. I felt some angst coming up when I thought about ending this video, because I felt, oh, perhaps I'm not going to implement this. Perhaps I'm not going to. And then I'm realizing that's worrying. It's, although it is good, a good observation, it is that. The question is, how do I relate to it in a way that empowers me and makes me implement it? That's the key question. And so I shouldn't feel bad about that. It's a good thought. And there's nothing that hinders me to do it after I've quitted this video. So that's why I'm quitting it now. 3, 2, 1. Bye. See ya.